As I mentioned earlier, the Roman Empire in the West had fallen in the 6th century, and there was no objective state in the West. If you were in the East, the Byzantines, you lived in something which is recognizable to a modern person. You paid tax to a government. That government paid for bureaucracy and armies out of that taxation. And there were courts of law, there was a written law code, there were judges, there were public baths, etc., libraries. It was something we would recognise. In the West, that wasn't possible. The German migrant barbarian invaders who had brought down the Western Roman Empire were illiterate in general, and they weren't able to rule over a sophisticated bureaucracy. Instead, land ownership and government became essentially synonymous. Each area was divided into small units of agricultural production, self-sufficient agricultural production, and over each of those units there was a hard man who protected you from being attacked by some other hard man of a neighbouring area, and in exchange you gave him a proportion of the fruits of the soil from your labours, and he judged over your disputes. And of course, the problem always existed that the hard man next door might get together with another hard man and together attack and destroy your village and divide up your land between them. And so in order to avoid that happening, each hard man would enter into alliances with other hard men, that they would help each other in the event of attack. And one of them would be the leader of that alliance, preside over it, and he would be a sort of boss, and he would enter into arrangements with other people of similar rank, and somebody would preside over that. And so you end up with this pyramid, mafia-style pyramid of governmental organisation in the West. And as with organised crime, which it closely resembles, this form of social organisation is extremely violent, and because territories are shifting all the time, people are betraying each other, and peasants are getting killed, and villages are getting burnt down. And so it's not really a desirable long-term form of social organisation, but it tends to be what happens if there's no alternative. So the clergy and the monastic reform movement were keen to somehow remedy this rather undesirable state of affairs, and so they initiated. They initiated, perhaps also some lay people who were troubled in conscience as well may also have initiated. When it first began is of course obscure, as with these things. The movement known as chivalry. Two key elements in the early years of that movement were the Truce of God and the Peace of God, both attempts to rein in the craziness. The Truce of God was an idea that you shouldn't fight on Sundays or Fridays or Lent or Eastertide or certain important feast days or Christmas. So really it was a way of reducing the death count, reducing the amount of bloodletting by simply reducing the opportunity for it to occur. The peace of God was the idea that certain groups in society should be exempted from all such violence: peasants, Jews, monks, nuns, clergy, women. Obviously, that's a lot of people. That's the majority of the population. Children. That's the majority of the population. So the idea was get the hard men to fight with each other. Let's keep everybody else out of it. Let's reduce the number of occasions on which they're able to do this, and then. Humanitarian, to use an anachronistic term, norms were introduced for what their conduct when they actually were fighting each other. One of the most important of these was the possibility of yielding, that is, that you could surrender rather than simply fight to the death. And if you did surrender, the consequence wouldn't be that you were sold into slavery or just killed, which is what might have happened in previous eras, but that you could be taken prisoner and then ransomed by your relatives. So obviously that makes the whole thing much more civilized. And as I say, from that whole movement emerges the ethos and ethic of chivalry. But one of the big problems was, if you were one of these lords, one of these local hardmen, you were going to have to do a lot of shady things in order to prevent yourself from being defeated and your territory gobbled up by rival hardmen from other families in adjacent areas. and that meant that you were going to find it difficult to ever receive communion. Famously, in the 13th century, at the Great Ecumenical Council Lateran IV, because it became so common for people to put off ever receiving communion until just before death, because it was seen as so inconvenient in that sort of society to have to be in a state of grace for any length of time, and certainly to complete the penances required to atone for all the terrible crimes that you'd committed over the course of your life. People just wouldn't receive communion until their deathbed. Now, this was quite good for a monastic life, because they would realise that they were facing 25,000 years in purgatory after they died. So they would try to get round that by leaving a lot of money to found many monasteries, or founding them in the last years of their life, and then making a condition of the foundation that the monks should forever and ever and ever pray for the repose of the soul of the hard man who founded the monastery. So it was quite good in terms of promoting religious life, but it wasn't a good way for the hard men themselves to live out their Christian lives. I mean, if they were ever run over by a bus or hit by a meteor, they were going to go straight to hell, because they didn't have time to go to confession and make their peace with God. So this is the sociological background to the tremendous response to the calling of the First Crusade by Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont, because he was essentially offering the possibility to the nobility of Western Europe to do what they were really good at, what they trained their entire life to do, which is killing people, and do it, and it be a commendable, meritorious, just act, which would actually get them out of purgatory instead of sending them to purgatory for thousands and thousands of years. Somebody at the time even called it a new way of going to heaven. So there was great excitement to this. And as promised, I should go into the unique attributes of the crusading indulgence. So normally, if you receive an indulgence, it's either partial or plenary. If it's partial, it remits some of the temporal punishment due to your sin. If it's plenary, as long as you have the right dispositions, which is a big if, it remits all the temporal punishment due to your sins. You have to fulfill certain criteria. You need to pray for the intentions of the Pope, because he's usually the person granting the indulgence. Usually Our Father, Hail Mary and a creed for the Pope's intentions, and then you need to complete the penance that you're given when you go to confession. So you need to go to confession, get absolved, complete the penance which the priest gives you, pray for the Pope's intentions, perform whatever act it is the indulgence is attached to, like praying the rosary in public or something, and then bingo, if you have the right dispositions, get run over by a bus, go straight to heaven. You can't deliberately get run over by a bus, because that's a mortal sin. So don't try that at home, folks. But so that's the normal arrangement for getting an indulgence nowadays. Now, that arrangement has a bit of a problem if you're a medieval hard man, which is that when you go to confession, you say to the priest, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's 27 years since my last confession. I have burnt down 25 villages, killed 4 barons, 6 counts and a duke, and etc. And he says, well, pray for the people you've sinned and fast on bread and water for 325 years and try not to do it again. Now, the problem with that is the fasting on bread and water for 325 years. Obviously, it's not going to be very convenient for you to carry on being the head of your local family, in the natural and mafia sense of family, if you're spending your whole time fasting on bread and water, because you're likely to get beaten in fights if you've been fasting on bread and water all year. So that's why they favoured the found as many monasteries as you can and try to go to confession just before you die method instead. The crusading indulgence was different in that it substituted for all penance. So if you took a vow to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims or die in the attempt, and as a sign that you'd taken this vow, this practice dates to the Council of Clermont itself, you would sew onto your cloak 2 pieces of red cloth to form a cross, so that you had your cross on your shoulders. It was called taking the cross. And this was a sign that you had taken the Crusaders' vow, taken the cross. And then you would go to confession and you would tell the priest that you had taken the cross. and the priest would therefore not prescribe you any penance. That oath to liberate Jerusalem from Islam or die in the attempt would constitute the whole of your penance. And therefore, if you died in the course of the expedition, as long as you hadn't committed any mortal sins on the way, then you would go to heaven. And this was the basis for the First Crusade.